Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1989 comedy drama titled Parenthood. Now, Parenthood runs for 2 hours and 4 minutes long. It is directed by Ron Howard. The script was written by Lowell Sands, and this is a pretty cool name, Babalu Mendel. The story was done by Ron Howard, Lowell Gans, and Babalu Mandel. It is produced by Brian Grazer. The soundtrack is by Randy Newman. The cinematography by Donald McAlpine. And it was edited by Daniel P. Hanley and Mike Hill. And the stars of the movie are Steve Martin, Mary Steenbergen, Jasen Robards, Dianne Wiest, who would be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. By the way, Randy Newman also won for Best Original Soundtrack for a movie. So there are a couple of Oscar nods in this one. No wins, I don't think, but several other well established accolades was provided for this movie. Joining out the cast, we have Rick Moranis, Leaf Phoenix, who of course is actually Joaquin Phoenix, but back then he was still Leaf Phoenix. We also have Keanu Reeves, Martha Plimpton, Harley Jane Kozak, Tom Hulce, Ivyann Schwan, Max Elliott Slade, Dennis Dugan, Eileen Ryan, Helen Shaw, Jason Fisher, Paul Linke, Alisan Porter, Ron Howard's brother Clint Howard, who seems to appear in almost every Ron Howard movie, and Charmin Lee. So, coming from a large family, as I was growing up, I came from a big family too of 6 siblings. I have, of course, 2 sisters, 3 brothers, an older sister, a younger sister, and 3 brothers, all younger than me. I can understand fully well what the Buckman clan had experienced in the 1989 situation comedy Parenthood, directed by Ron Howard. And I do take a lot of sympathy and I side a lot with the things that Gil Buckman had to deal with in his life, even though he was raising 3 children and my mother and father raised twice as many, 6. The trials and tribulations that embody the family dynamics may have some moments of absurdity. Yes, there's also triumphs, there's also conflicts, but then there's also a lot of rewarding stuff that come along with raising a family, whether it be a large family or a small family. And yeah, it's going to be complicated because, like in the case of my mother and father, our ages spanned, so we all each had to kind of almost like our own different conflicts, because my family has a bit of some age gaps within each other. I mean, in the case of the teens, it would be my older sister and me. The young kids would be like younger sister and my oldest younger brother. And then, of course, we had the small children being the 2 youngest ones. And even though, there's a lot of issues that come at hand, we somehow all seem to somewhat work each other's problems out. And we may come out victorious, or we might have to suffer at the unfortunate hands of defeat. But either way, we all try our best to work things out. Because that's what families are all about. I mean, even though this movie has a lot of absurdity in this movie, there is a lot of realism that comes with not just Gil and Karen Buckman's family, but also the family outside. They're all faced with conflicts, they're all faced with issues, and in the end, everything just works out well. For most. Yeah, I would say for most, not all of them. Not everybody. Well, however, underneath all of the surreal moments, there is a great hint of realism that the cast portrays. Now, many parents, maybe I could say, have dealt with the angst and anguish of parenting. Who hasn't? Who dares to cast the first stone? But in spite of those difficult moments, it is always very rewarding. Maybe not necessarily rewarding in terms of cash, not rewarding in terms of medals or trophies or any other type of accolades that you can shove on your mantelpiece. No, the rewards comes from you just being proud of the family you've raised and proud to see how far your kids have succeeded. That's where the reward comes in. It may not come in the form of currency. It may not come in the form of a medal. It may not even come in the form of a toy or a present or even a cake. It may just come in the form of a sense of pride and a sense of sportsmanship, knowing that you have raised your kids as best as you can and how they turn out. Well, you just love them for who they are. Aside from Ron Howard's masterful direction, he had the duo of wonderful screenwriters like Lowell Gans and Babaloo Mandel. In fact, this movie was loosely based on the fact that these three people have also raised a big family and have also experienced what it's like to raise kids, whether they're babies, whether they're small children, whether they're adolescents, or even just starting to emerge as adults. The Buckman family is a widely expansive family dynamic that doesn't just center around the main characters of Gil and Karen Buckman, but also it deals with the situations that even his siblings have faced, and even the conflicts that even his own father and mother have also dealt with. The movie might sound like something that might be family like kid friendly because the movie is about kids, or the movie is centered around kids, but it's not really about the kids. It's more about parents. That's why it's called Parenthood, because it's all about mostly the parents that are being the center stage. Sure, there's kids, and sure, the kids are involved in the parents' life because part of parenthood, you can't have a parenthood situation without the kids. Whether they're teenagers, whether they're small children, whether they're babies. But a lot of it is seen through the eyes and the perspectives of the parents raising these kids. and how they are approaching this kind of situation. Though it is regarded as an ensemble comedy, the main focus of the movie is Steve Martin. Now, I think with maybe the exception of Steve Martin, everybody else seems to be pretty much supporting characters. Steve Martin is the top billing guy. He's the one who stars as the long suffering father, Jill Buckman. He's a sales executive in St. Louis, and he is, of course, struggling through life, balancing parenthood and, of course, his work life. But then again, when you're a parent, you sometimes often question yourself, what is the bigger load? The happenings that's going on in work, or the going ons that's happening in your family life? Gil is kind of like placed in the middle. His life is filled to the brim with commitments. His workload stresses him out. I mean, he's been asking for a promotion, but then his boss decides to pick some random asshole who would rather prefer work over family, and it comes to a point where he eventually quits his job, and then and then and then the straw that hits his that straw that bit the camel's back. I don't know how the quote goes. Anyways, his wife Karen, played by Mary Steenbergen, well, she's got an announcement to make. She's got a little bread baking in the oven. Yes, that's right. They once had 3 children, but a new one is on the way. It's bad enough that he's having trouble with 3 children, especially his oldest son, Kevin, played by Jasen Fisher, who's going through some psychological scarrings and may need to seek therapy, which of course back in the 80s was an ugly word, because when you say that your kid needs therapy, it's like, where the fuck did I go wrong? These days, when a kid needs therapy, it's out there to help him. But back in the 80s, it was an ugly word, almost taboo. Not quite, but almost. And of course, that's gonna make him sometimes often question a judge, like, is it my fault that he needs therapy? Where did I go wrong? What did I do to make him suffer? Was it because, I mean, of course, a lot of it stems from the fact that his son was placed on the little league baseball team that he coaches, because hey, in stereotypical middle class American lifestyle, all fathers are like volunteer little league coaches. So then he puts his son probably in one of the most difficult positions in baseball, second base. And yeah, second base is difficult. And apparently the kid tried to catch what would appear to be a simple fly ball, and he missed, and he cost his team the loss. And apparently, Kevin has been kind of traumatized by it. Of course, Gil also has often questioned his parenting because of the fact that it stems from the fact that he was also apparently raised in a not so glorious upbringing, because his father was a frequent inebriate who tried to overcome his struggles by scarfing down a few Jack Daniels and could make a complete ass of himself in any public event. And Jill has often made note of that every time he confronts his father, Frank, played by, of course, Jasen Robards. So his workload has stressed him to the point where he becomes betrayed by the company that he works, so he quits his job. Meanwhile, he has to deal with his oldest son, Kevin, who's been battling chronic depression, and his two younger children, Taylor, his daughter Taylor, and his son Justin, are also dealing with issues of their own, like they're not developing faster. But I don't really see anything that's wrong with these kids. Okay, so they're rambunctious. So they would rather play tag in the mud and squirt paint in each other's faces. But hey, they're kids. We were all like that at one point. We were all very bratty. But eventually, as time goes on, we get over these things. We get better. We've all done bratty things in our lifetimes, or things that we thought was funny back then, but now we look back at it as being immature, petty, and maybe even sometimes mean-spirited. But we get over it. We're resilient in that way. And if that doesn't overwhelm Gil, his wife Karen, played by Mary Steenbergen, is having another child, but Gil is incompetent of that revelation for financial reasons and even for insecure reasons. Now, even though I said this is a comedy, it's not a light comedy because Karen has even often talked about contemplating having an abortion if he finds that raising 4 kids is overwhelming. But of course, we all know he doesn't want that to happen. Obviously, this is not the movie for like pro-choice people. This is more of a pro-life type of thing. This movie actually has a lot more conservatism in this movie. Perhaps more so than a more liberal leaning type of movie. I'm not using any buzzwords or anything like that. All of this has led to Gil to be neurotic and cynical, but also very happy that he brought life into the world and will bend over backwards to become a better father than his dad ever was. I mean, who can forget? I mean, even though this movie is mostly comedy with a lot of heavy-handed drama, there is still a great memorable scene where apparently at Kevin's birthday, the entertainer who was supposed to be Cowboy Bob, yeah, their theme was cowboys and western stuff, he couldn't make it. So Gil decides to wear a little tiny hat put over his head and prance around as Cowboy Gil, just to find ways to interact with his son and to hopefully lift his spirits a bit, which I think is very commendable of him. Okay, I didn't like the idea that he had to quit his job, but I can also understand where he's going through. A lot of office politics is predominantly bullshit. Sometimes it's not about the honesty in your work, but how much you can fuck over some other employee to get yourself to the top. You don't get to the top by honesty. People do sometimes want to expect a little bit of backstabbing. Because a lot of office politics is bullshit. But eventually his boss also starts to realize that all this time he was the better employee. I'm pretty glad that this movie was not set in like big city places that always seems to be familiar, like New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. This is set in St. Louis, Missouri, which is a big city, but it's not, Well, you have the big arch, the ring, the yeah. There's like a ring that uh is quite visible to the St. Louis skyline. Toronto, you have the CN Tower. Seattle has the Space Needle. It's kind of like a landmark, so to speak. Chicago has the Sears Tower. New York City has the Empire State Building. You get these kind of things. So, yeah, it's set in St. Louis, which is not a bad city. Nothing against the people from St. Louis, Missouri. So you don't need to be in Missouri, even though St. Louis is in Missouri. Little joke there, folks. No, you're all good. But I'm just kind of glad it's not in the familiar places. Let's just put it that way. Like I said, the movie has all of the extended family members, and they're all dealing with personal issues from their family background. Dianne Wiest is Gil's older sister, Helen. By the way, Steve Martin's character is supposed to be 35 years old, but he just doesn't convince me to be 35. Okay, when I was 35 years old, I still kind of almost looked like a boy. In fact, some people used to tell me I don't look like I'm 35, I look like I'm 25. Which I'm kind of flattered. But come on now, Steve Martin. I mean, when this movie came out in '89, he was 44 years old. And even then, his hair was already grayed out. Yes, I know when he was in his 20s, his hair was already turning gray at a relatively young age. I mean, hey, my first gray hair came when I was 37. But it wasn't like growing out like Martin's. And even when he was 44 years old, he still looked like an old man. And yet, back in '89, he was a year younger than my father. Because Steve Martin's born in '45, my father was born in '44. Anyway, just wanted to point that out. Meanwhile, yes, Dianne Wiest plays Gil's older sister, Helen, who was also nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her efforts. She was absolutely wonderful, as she always is, as she played a recently divorced wife named Helen Buckman, and she's trying to cope with her two children who have become devastatingly heartbroken since then. I mean, her husband was a dentist, and apparently they had a nasty divorce, and all of a sudden he just suddenly quickly got into a new relationship and also has a new family, and he actually pretty much cut off ties from his old ones. Even to the point where he acts like none of them even fucking exist. I was to show you how much of a fucking asshole he was. And his children were devastatingly heartbroken since then and have kind of like also distanced themselves from their own mother who's trying to reason with them. Even though, yes, she's not being necessarily overprotective, but she can be at times a bit overly judgmental by them. But then again, she's trying to understand what's going through their heads. Obviously, the impact of the nasty divorce has took an overwhelmingly toll on them. Her older daughter, Julie, played by Martha Plimpton, is involved in a provocative relationship with a drag racer stoner named Todd, played by Keanu Reeves, who also once even admits that he was in an abusive relationship with his father. And she doesn't really approve too much of Todd because of his reckless lifestyle of partying and stoner. You know, he talks kind of still like a stoner, man. You know, type of voice. You know, almost like it's almost like he's doing another Bill and Ted movie, but instead of Ted, his name is Todd. Because let's face it, why not? Ted and Todd almost sound alike. But this next movie is going to be named Tad. Just a suggestion. Tom. Okay, I'm just getting off. I'm getting off the rocker here. Anyways, anyways, there was one scene where he hid Todd under the bed, and while she didn't mind the fact that Julie is in a relationship, even though she still feels that maybe Julie can do better. Well, I guess it's kind of better than having some kind of boring, um, you know, immaculate dressed kind of individual. No. I mean, okay. The thing that she disapproved of was mostly because while they were like getting it on with each other, they started taking pictures of each other. Yeah, long before selfies, they took the Polaroid camera and were taking photos of each other doing it. I guess they didn't have a camcorder or a webcam or use their phones. Well, then again, it's 1989. Nobody was carrying phones with them. So he took Polaroid pictures of them getting it on, which didn't sit very well to them. Meanwhile, behind her mother's backs, they make out in the bedroom, taking suggestive photos with each other. They have an on again, off again relationship. They break up, they reconcile, and she ends up getting pregnant. The question is, will Todd actually break out of his shell and become a responsible father? Or is he just going to continue living the life of reckless abandonment, which would probably result in having Julie become a young widow? It could happen. I don't want it to happen, but it could happen. Meanwhile, her son Gary has completely distanced herself from everyone because he's going through, the stages of most 14-year-old boys are going through. Also, he's trying to make one last effort to try to connect with his estranged father, but his father does not want anything to do with the family. So then, he goes into his breaks into his dental office and destroys all the equipment. Going, hey, dude, look, I know you're angry. I know you're pissed off. And maybe this fucker does deserve some karma. But come on, this is dental equipment. Do you know how much money you did on property damage? Dental equipment costs almost close to $500,000 that you fucking destroyed. And what about the patients who he has to tend to? What if one of them has such a severely bad toothache that if they don't get it seen right away, it could be the end of their life. You have to think about others, not just think about yourself. When he also has a mystery bag with him. When Helen at first thinks that he's carrying drugs and alcohol, no, it actually turns out that he has a whole selection full of nudie magazines, and he's also watching a lot of dirty movies as well. And it's not because the kid is like a closet pervert, but because he's going through the menstrual cycles. But the reason why he's doing it is because his mother won't understand him. So eventually, Todd has to step in as a designated brother and tries to explain to him that, hey, you're going through these stages. That's perfectly normal, son. But however, though, like I said, a lot of things do have a happy ending. I mean, Helen eventually starts dating Gary's science teacher, who Gary takes a great liking to, and he seems to be somewhat as a more welcomed, approved addition, and maybe even longing for the father figure that he always wanted, that he couldn't get from his actual father. So I'm glad everything turns out well for the end. Oh, and by the way, Helen also gets pregnant. How about that? A child and a grandchild almost close to each other in age. You thought you never seen it coming. And I thought parents stop having children once they reach 45. Well, my mother stopped at 39. After too many miscarriages, she came to a point where she just said, enough's enough. No more heartbreak. Or she was just getting through the age where she just can't do it anymore. 6 is a nice round number anyway. The family circus doesn't stop from there. And even the head patriarch, Frank, played by Jasen Robards, has had issues of his own, being that he was not a good father during their childhood, according to Gil. And he does show a lot of emotional redemption when he tries to come to terms with his youngest son, Larry, who is obviously the black sheep of the family because all his other family members seem to have matured and have had led successful lives. Larry, well, he just hasn't broken away from his childlike lifestyle because he just doesn't want to grow up, take the initiative of responsibility, and just tries to go out and find get rich quick schemes. And he also has issues involving, well, you know, trying to get rich, including, placing a bet of something like $60,000. And apparently, the basketball team that he was predicting on winning, ended up losing. And now all of a sudden the bookies are after him. And if he doesn't pay soon, he's going to be fucked. But somehow Frank still kind of looks up to him the most. Because he thinks that maybe his get rich quick schemes just some ways of him trying to form a business, but nope, he's not. He's just doing everything he can to mooch away all his money. He doesn't really have a real job. Instead, he just goes around looking for ways to get rich quickly, which seems to backfire on him because the bookies are after him, the debt collectors are after him, and he doesn't pay off soon. Well, it could be his money or his life. Pick your poison, buddy. And he also has a son, a biological son, an interracial son, because he had intercourse with a Vegas showgirl who just happens to be black. And his mixed race son goes by, this might sound a bit offensive, but the boy's name is Cool. No, I'm not stuttering. His name is Cool. Anyways, he's going around. Larry is, of course, Frank's favorite child and tries to do everything he could to get him out of debt, which he owes quite a lump sum, or he will be killed. He also, like I said, knocked up a girl in Las Vegas and is now raising a son named Cool, played by Alex Burrall, because a name like Alex will not stand out for him. I'm just kidding. Frank knows that Larry won't be back anytime soon, so he decides to raise Cool on his own. And this kind of almost even gives Robards a chance to rectify from what he has done wrong in his past and tries to turn that wrong into a right, even if it's like in later years of his life. He's going to raise Cool differently from the way he raised his other 4 children. I mean, Frank apparently learns from Larry that he is up to no good, especially when he tried to pawn his car and without his consent. And the last pairing comes from Susan, who is the younger sister of Gil and Helen, and Larry's older sister. She's a school teacher, while her scientist husband, named Nathan, played by Rick Moranis, is not encouraging but more or less indoctrinating their prodigal daughter, Patty, played by Ivyann Schwan, to become a smarter kid beyond her years. So although she might be well functioning cognitively from a brain standpoint, however, though her socialization skills had kept her apart. And while she might be intelligent beyond her years, it had took an effect on her socialization. And Patty thinks that this is like, and Susan thinks that this is like leading her to a dangerous path where she could become as smart as a tank, but socially underdeveloped because Nathan doesn't want her to do stuff that most kids will do. And that is to somewhat get a little rowdy, get a little neurotic, get their hands dirty. I mean, it's fine that you encourage her to have a good education, But at the same time, he's leading her more on a dangerous path by not encouraging her, but indoctrinating her with his authoritative ways of raising. Of course, Susan also has aspirations of wanting to have more children, but Nathan dismisses the idea and wants to focus more on Patty's academia. And that another child is just going to push her aside and afraid that he might dumb her down. But she thinks that this approach is too forceful, and she wants her to live like a normal, regular child, to frolic and interact with kids her age, instead of reading books by Franz Kafka. And though this family seems quite interesting in its premise, it's still the least structured of them all. I mean, no fault from the actors, just the airtime. So it's great that comic legends like Steve Martin and Rick Moranis exchange lines with each other while contradicting each other in their parenting ways. We don't really get enough character development in the Susan, Nathan, and Patty situation. Sure, parenting is one of the hardest jobs in the world. Waking up all hours of the night to scare off the monster under the bed, getting the kids ready for school, getting dressed to go to work, and then coming home feeling exhausted with lots of other commitments to follow. But it could be a rewarding lifestyle too. After all, your day is never boring. There's always something new and exciting going on, whether it be overwhelming or underwhelming. And as you watch them grow up, it becomes very rewarding, no matter how they turn out. Just live your day to the fullest and enjoy the life that you got, and most importantly, love the life that you gave. And I think that's what the message is in this movie. It's very effectively done, and I think that's all I've got to say about this movie. So, when all is said and done, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Parenthood from 1989 a 9 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Writer saying, keep watching those movies. Sorry about that. And I'll see you around. Goodbye.